Business Hour. I'm Elizabeth Alfano. Great to see you every Tuesday and Thursday for the Plant-Based Business Hour at 1 o'clock Pacific time on Jane Unchained. And every Wednesday at 1 o'clock, it's the Awesome Vegans Influencer Series. Okay, today I am going down under because I'm going to explore beyond plant-based burgers. I'm going to explore beyond plant-based sausage. I'm getting into plant-based braised beef. You didn't think it existed? Well, it does. Before I bring on my guests from Australia, I just want to say the reason I do this show, the Plant-Based Business Hour, is because as we can see during COVID times, if we're going to have a safe future, we need a safe food supply. And a safe food supply is plant-based foods. And despite Beyond Meat soaring 23% yesterday, we do need more than Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods. So I'm here to encourage and give a platform for all the entrepreneurs that are trying to bring new plant-based items to the market, and also to let venture capitalists know just what is out there so that there can be more support for more plant-based foods and a safer future. So with that, I am going to bring on these mad scientists, or perhaps creative geniuses. We're not exactly sure yet. I'm going to bring them on from Australia. We are live in their lab to see what they're growing. Jim Fuller and Chris McLaughlin, thanks for being with me.
Hi, thanks for that. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So I really can say good day, mate, because it's so early for you.
You can. Yeah. We say it all the time.
Yeah. You can see we got our shed light on.
I think it's 6 a.m. for you, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So thanks for being with me. I appreciate you getting up early. Okay. So before we get into the mad science of it all, braised beef coming from mushrooms, which is so exciting. I love mushrooms. All vegans love mushrooms, but it's more than just the taste. We're going to get into that. First of all, I want to let people know just who the heck are you? So maybe we can start with Chris. You've got lots of farming background under your belt, and then I want to get to the science of it all with Jim. So Chris, tell me a little bit about how you come to work with mushrooms.
How I come to work with mushrooms, I'd say a lot of farming background is probably a generous description. I had a farming company for about 5 years, and prior to that, I'd worked in different parts of the food chain. But had generally come to the view 10, 15 years ago in my late teens, early 20s, that we had a unsustainable food system and that there were lots of issues with it, both in terms of how we managed livestock and how we were eroding a lot of soil.
Yes.
So, and that obviously piqued my interest in kind of mushrooms and soil biology and a whole bunch of cool kind of factors that functions that mushrooms play in our environment. And so when I got into farming, or wanted to get into primary production, the specific farming opportunity that cropped up was mushrooms, which was good. And I was in a part of the supply chain where we had been purchasing a large portion of this particular farm's mushrooms weekly. There was only 2 little organic mushroom farms in Australia. So when it fell over, I kind of moved to the country, much to the dismay of my wife, and a couple of the guys that I was working in the retail chain with. We took quite a small little farm. There was 3 or 4 of us to start with. That ended up, by the time Jim and I left the business last year, there was 80 odd across a couple of sites. We'd grown from a couple of tons a week to about 12, 13 tons a week of production, and supplying supermarkets nationally. Coles and Woolworths are our kind of 2 largest supermarket chains down in Australia, and Costco as well we supplied into, and then maybe 700 or 800 little kind of independent organic shops. But over the last 12 months of that particularly, I guess I got to know Jim across a couple of years, but I pulled him into the business 12 months before we then both subsequently left it. And in that 12 months, had him working on some plant-based or, mushroom-based meat analogs. So we were trying to take a bunch of waste streams from different agricultural processes to identify where we could get the raw materials to make some of these kind of products. And we started with what we had on our own farm, which was the stems of agaricus mushrooms. So Jim got to some learning about the kind of textures and proteins and fibers and different things we could push and pull to make cool, mushroom-based meat stuff. And that's now.
Okay, so we're going to get into the science of what can actually be done with mushrooms. I think people by now have heard of mushrooms being the foundation and base for meat, but we're not exactly sure how that all comes to be. Before I leave you, Chris, and hop over to Jim, I just want to say, I think you have a bunch of awards under your belt. So Young Farmer of the Year, Young Organic Farmer of the Year. Do I have that right?
What was it? It was Organic Farmer of the Year, Young Farmer of the Year, and Young Grower of the Year, all in the same year, which was
well, what a year! What a great year!
I think it was they were self-fulfilling after the first couple, and we had a really good team. It wasn't just me.
Yeah, it always takes a village for sure. So, Jim, I do not hear that Aussie accent from you. I believe you come from Texas. Tell me about your mad scientific ways.
Well, look, I started out as a chemical engineering student in San Antonio, Texas, while I was a fine dining chef. And that was, all of about 8 to 10 years there. And my wife's also a scientist, and she's actually Australian. We had decided a while back that we were going to move to Australia. Waiting for a visa took a really long time. So she got the opportunity to take a job in California, and we moved to the North Bay area of San Francisco. I stopped being a chef and a student, and I actually went to work for a mushroom farm out there, Gourmet Mushrooms in Sebastopol. So I actually got trained in mushrooms there, but I knew all about them as an ingredient from my background as a chef and fine dining. Loved them as an ingredient, and then I got the opportunity to grow them as food and medicine, and also in the North Bay area of San Francisco. They grow wild everywhere, so I kind of fell down the rabbit hole, so to speak, and I had like this cosmic aha, like I want to do this forever. And I ended up doing it as a hobby and as science for all the time, just mushrooms this, mushrooms that, mushroom books, mushroom drawings, everything's mushrooms, right? We actually then got the opportunity to finally move up to Australia. And when I got out here, set on my merry way and started up a couple of different mushroom farms and different things, growing mushrooms in the backyard and all kinds of stuff. And if we were to look around the lab, you'd see all kinds of fermentations and tinctures and medicinal applications, all that stuff. It's taught me well and truly. But then our most recent thing is plant-based or mushroom-based meat. And we took the turn to go with the slow braised style. Because a lot of the meat analogs out there are in the minced category, and it would be competition jumping into something that's already existing. We love those products. We love that platform. We don't necessarily want to jump in and say, "Oh, we're better," or compete. It's more like, what else can we do? What more can we do? So that's what we looked at. We looked at how we can get mushrooms that have fibers that we can then make act like meat, and then what do we got to do? What's the least amount of things we can do to make them function and taste, so that you get taste and texture? And to me, that's going to be what brings people back to it. It's taste and texture, and then all the rest of the stuff we just kind of try to get into place. With the cost and the health. Fortunately, we use mushrooms. Health is there, so we really get to benefit from the platform of a healthy ingredient, and then we just got to work really hard to make sure that the processes are minimal, the cost is low, and that we can get it out to everyone so that they can taste it, try it, and love it just like us.
Okay, so much to unpack there. We are going to get to the business model of how to get it out there and keep the costs low. And we are going to get to how you structure it. Mushrooms are this incredible thing that I'm sure I'm using the wrong terms, but for my layman's terms for this conversation, I'll say structure until you go ahead and correct me. But before we get to those two things, let's just talk about the beauty that is mushrooms. So in layman's terms, either Jim or both of you, let's go a little bit. We've talked about that health. So good for your gut health and good for curing of disease. People may or may not know this. Maybe touch on that, but then take us to, for lack of a better expression, the intelligence that is mushrooms and the mushroom community. I'm using the wrong words. Go ahead and fill us in.
All right. I'll try.
I love all your words, by the way. They're really good.
Okay.
Definitely, absolutely one of the first things that got me super interested in mushrooms.
I'm losing your audio.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Definitely one of the first things that got me interested in mushrooms was gaining an awareness about how they kind of functioned in a rainforest, really. So we've got what's effectively a live, intelligent organism. There's no central nervous system, the way we would identify one for a human. Like there's no obvious brain or any central component that's making calculations, but it's absolutely making calculations. It's connected to every single node in the forest, every tree, every plant, every other bit of fungi or the lichen, the moss, the bacteria are more or less internetworked by fungi. And in and amongst this network, it's kind of calculating which plants and which trees and which components need what nutrients and where they're available, where some of these trees are about to die, which ones to abandon, which ones to feed, which ones to not. Somehow it's making all these calculations. There's a brain somewhere doing that. And that capability, I guess, just fascinated me and kind of sent me on a long path of learning about all the other cool things that mushrooms do. But that was kind of the starting point for me.
And so, because I just want people to understand really the complexity that is the mushroom, and then why we can make it into so many great things. So you're saying that it's interconnected through fungi. Is that right? First of all, let me backtrack. It's a microbe. Is that correct?
Correct. Microscopic organism, a microbe.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So I know it's early for you guys. It's a microbe. Okay. Okay. So, and just a little bit of a reminder, we talk about it on this show all the time. Protein comes from plants and microbes. It does not come from animals. Animals eat plants and microbes, and that's how they get protein. Just a little nutritional reminder, folks. Okay, so we're working with the beauty that is the mushroom, and it's got this network where it communicates to itself, I guess, and its network that it can get more nutrients here or more nutrients there, where to go, where to feed. I think at one point in a conversation prior to this, Chris, you said that there's an electrical energy that it can channel. Am I right on that?
Yeah, well, it's electrostatic, like it's electroconductive. I think, what I mentioned to you last time is probably a pretty controversial view, but I think there's good evidence for it, is that like heavy mycelial mass and large kind of ratio of fungi in dirt or in an environment will attract rain and lightning. And so by cultivating that, you can, in a way, kind of cultivate a shift or terraforming an environment. So we thought that was pretty cool too.
Yeah.
When you talk about the kind of source of protein thing, there's some interesting characteristics of fungi. Like if you look on an evolutionary path where we diverge from, we're a lot closer to fungi than we are to plants. They function similarly in that they take a bunch of enzymes and bacteria and stuff, and they digest. They're like an external stomach, the same way we digest and the same way our stomach digests. And when we go through the process we digest all this stuff, we consume it, we eat it, we turn it into what we need for our body to function, and we exhale CO2 in the process, which is exactly what fungi does. So there's kind of and they absorb kind of the radioactive and electrostatic spectrum similarly to we do. So we get vitamin D from being out in the sun, or we convert sunlight, UV spectrum into vitamin D. So do mushrooms. So there's a whole bunch of kind of interesting characteristics to them that we think make them really good food and bioassimilants for humans as well. Yeah.
So I hope everyone is getting their respect on for the mushroom. And of course, there are so many different types of mushrooms. I want to throw it to Jim. And I apologize, everybody, if I didn't say this before. The reason these two are wearing Fable hats is because Fable Food Company is the name of the company that they own in Australia. And we're going to, yay. Oh, wait, I see your packet of braised beef and I raise you because I'm going to get to eating. Once you guys start cooking, I raise you what we're talking about. Can you see this? I made my lunch over noodles. Can you see it there? That's braised beef made from mushrooms. I'm going to eat that in just a second. Okay, so talk to me about the structure of mushrooms. Because you're not alone in working with mushrooms as a plant-based food. There are other companies, and I know people are racing to get out mushrooms, bacon made from mushrooms and burgers made from mushrooms. That's kind of a long time in the making already. But I understand that you can grow them or structure them so that they build upon themselves, and you could have, let's say, a chunk of meat come from a mushroom. Walk me through that, Jim.
All right. So as we've talked about the mycelium, that's the network of the fungi.
Okay, so I have to stop you just because not everybody maybe knows what that is. I think
Yeah.
if I've got this correct, when you say mycelium, you're talking about the little tendons that grow at the bottom of the mushroom that you never see because they cut off in the grocery store.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Typically like a white cottony type growth. Whenever people see that, that's when they say that's the mold. It's growing on the bread. That's the white mold. But that's the body of the organism. So that's like 95% of its life cycle is spent in that format. So, and that speaks to what mushrooms do in their life cycle. They're nature's recyclers, and that's how we get food from them, because they get food from the environment, and their food from the environment is not made from the sun and photosynthetic pathways like plants. They actually take the plants that have used the photosynthetic pathways and digest them as we do our own food, like external stomachs. They put enzymes out into the environment, break down like chitin and cellulose, which are structural materials that make a tree stand tall. And not many organisms on the planet can do that, like termites and some bacteria, but they have specific enzymes that actually break down like really long chain structural carbon bonds. And then they turn them into simple sugars and absorb them, but they leave behind these enzymes or the remnants of the enzymes in the environment, which are full of things like nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium, and the plants come along and get the rain that's dribbled that stuff down, the micronutrients. So that's why they're called nature's recyclers. Okay, so in doing so, they surge forward with that filamentous growth, which is essentially like a living mobile glue. So if you've got particles of something like a fiber that's carbon bonds, they can break it down, and you can selectively break it down like all the way or partially. And you can also get it to continue surging forward and then knit together another carbon heavy molecule or particle that's near it. They just creep through their environment. And then, like Chris was talking about, them keeping a rolling stock of their environment, they don't necessarily completely decimate or degrade anything along the way. They just move along, and then it's like islands in the stream where you'd have like colonies of food and sustenance for them that they may revert back to if they surge forward into a really hot, dry area and realize, oh, we should not move assets that direction. Pull it back. So anyway, they're essentially knitting together a network of themselves. They're this filamentous fungal growth that knits it all together. It's like a net. And it's like that living glue, that if you have a solid mass of this, or if you pick a bit of soil, you would see it forming a solid mass, because the mycelium, the fungal network, has wrapped around all the components in that soil. And if you get a large fungal colony, you can pick up masses that are super big and heavy. And like the largest organism on the planet is a fungus, and it's in the northwestern U.S. The stats are always wrong, but it's something like 2,500 football fields wide. You can see it from space. It's like the disease in an ash forest. It's a disease. It's the fungal change of the trees due to this fungus being there in the roots. You can see from space. It's just that big.
So again, so much to unpack here. It's like Mushrooms, the sci-fi movie. Okay, so some mushrooms are good for us. Some mushrooms are bad for us. Yeah. Walk us through a little bit of the health stuff, and then we got to get to eating, because let's be real about what we care about. So tell me about some of the health benefits, because not all mushrooms are good for us. Is that accurate?
Well, you can find toxins in the whole kingdom. So just like plants, fungi will produce toxins to deter things or even to attract things, just depending on what sort of level of toxicity you want to talk about. But yeah, we can find some of the stuff that they've produced to be quite medicinal for us. And to speak to something like cordycepin, that has evolved to actually take over and through a biochemical pathway control and then digest and eat an insect. But however, if a human were to consume cordyceps, and the cordycepin, the enzyme that's there, or the enzymes and like the nucleosides that are there, they function differently within our cells, and they go around scavenging like atmospheric oxygen and then assimilating it into the cell and things like that. So we find that there are different chemical things out there like nucleosides, proteins, enzymes, but also all the way down to the very simple structure like glucans beta-glucans, and some alpha-glucans. Functional, small polysaccharides that as soon as they're attached to your cells, they make your body do some weird things. And it might be as simple as triggering an immune response when there's no threat, so you have a heightened immune system, or it could be just making a digestive pathway work a little bit easier. So there's all kinds of chemical families, molecular families, mineral things that are there and present in lots of different types of mushrooms. And as soon as you get to cooking them, all that stuff kind of spills out.
So let's get to cooking, should we? I think we're in your lab in Australia. For those of you just joining us, very wee hours of the morning in Australia. So tell me what you've got behind you and what you're going to make, and I'm going to get to eating while you get to making.
Yeah. Sure. Well, as I was saying the other day, I might even just see if we can give you a little brief look around. This might not go so well. You can see the wall is kind of half painted there.
Great.
Yeah, and this is kind of Jim's garage come lab. So
okay,
we're extremely fortunate. I guess just before all this COVID craziness hit, we invested in turning Jim's garage into a lovely lab and kitchen, which has meant he's been locked down and been able to do a whole bunch of good research and development over the last few months.
Okay,
so what he's about.
Get in close to the camera, please, to show us what's going on there. Oh, so these are mushrooms, yes?
So this is the frozen.
This is
the frozen Fable product. It may not show up on the camera quite so well. Okay. But all we're going to do with it this morning is literally throw it in the pan with a little bit of fat, so vegetable oil, and heat it up, and we're going to eat it literally just dipped in barbecue sauce.
Oh, so yours is in barbecue sauce. Mine is over noodles. I want to show everybody what he was showing you. He's about to cook up their frozen version. Hold on, I got my chopsticks because you guys are basically in Asia. Look at that. This is what I've already cooked up. My braised beef made from mushrooms. Okay, but I want to see the chef because Jim was a fine dining chef. So we expect some great stuff, Jim.
I was just about to say we're not going to get the best of Jim's fine dining cheffery now because we're literally just going to throw it in the pan. But the objective, I guess, was to see how easy it is to prepare. Like through our process, we do actually cook the mushrooms through our process. It's part of what gives it the flavor and the texture profile that we bring is some transformation of some of those proteins, which means it only takes a couple of minutes to cook. Actually, when you threw up the noodles, my wife is Vietnamese and cooks a lot of noodles. She loves noodles. Yeah. And on our website is a recipe she's incredibly proud of that we cooked up the other week. So I think I've had maybe 4 or 5 serves of Fable on noodles in the last week or so while she was figuring all that out.
Yes, there's a great website, fablefood.co, where you have Exo noodles on your site. And a nice video of you guys as well. But while Jim is cooking and putting on his apron, which we all love and appreciate, Jim. Thank you for that. Maybe you can talk to me a little bit about what kind of products you have coming out after braised beef.
Sure.
I don't want to interrupt your flow. Unless Jim wanted to talk us through. Jim, are you doing show and tell or just show?
Just show.
He's doing just show in the background. Okay, everybody joining us. So we are making up some braised beef made out of mushrooms from the Fable Food Company in Australia. So right now we've got braised beef going on. It's going to fry right up. But I think there are other products coming out for us soon as well.
Correct. We've got, I guess, when we look at trying to approximate different kinds of meat in the market, as Jim was saying earlier, one of the reasons we went to market with this braised beef product was because there's a very crowded market for burgers and mince and sausages and all those kind of things. We do have a bunch of those in the pipeline. I guess, there's a few different ways of going about making mushroom meat. Like we were describing before when Jim was describing that process of all these fibers growing, seeking a nutrition source and knitting together. We kind of see that potentially as the pathway for whole cuts of meat, which is a real challenge. We think in the long term, there's culturally there's a huge portion of the population that has eating meat embedded in their habits. So there's those in the population that are more die-hard, that are going to go eat these kind of foods anyway. But to get that texture, to get that whole cut, we think that there'll be some cool combinations of using submerged substrates and some liquid cultures, and taking potentially some other plant fibers and growing mycelial mass onto those. So that might be where we see some whole cuts emerging. But prior to that, definitely we'll have some sausages and some mince and some burgers coming to the market very shortly.
So it's very exciting that there might be whole cuts of meat, quote unquote, whole cuts that taste like meat that are made out of mushrooms. I have a question here from Tom. He's saying, what do you season it with to make it taste like braised beef?
Therein lies the secret.
Okay, you'll have to buy shares into the company, Tom. Sorry.
Yeah, you can, if you kind of look at our ingredients, there's only 8 or 9 ingredients to this product if you count white and black pepper as 2 ingredients. Otherwise, there's some yeast. Effectively, it's not too different from like a baker's yeast. It's like a yeast extract, which gives it some of that kind of salty flavor. We use, Tom, a lot of the proteins that are in the shiitake mushroom, and we cook them in a certain way and in a certain sequence so that they get kind of like a Maillard reaction. So when you throw a steak on the grill, proteins fill up at high heat, you get a Maillard reaction with that, contributes significantly to the flavor. So it's a similar process we attempt. And as you can see there, Jim's got a little chunk.
Come on, everybody. It's braised beef, and I'm going to do the same. I want to show. Okay, I'm going to get to eating, so I can't ask any more questions. I want you guys to give me the answer to this because I'm going to start eating. I love this braised beef. I'm a huge fan. Is this considered GMO?
No, we don't do any genetic modification of any of the organisms. No, we just cook. Like there's obviously a whole bunch of secret sauce to the ingredient profile, the formulation, the process, the minutiae of when we push and pull some of the different steps. But really what we're trying to do is cook. We think that's kind of important in terms of the food that we eat generally. There's some amazing natural fibers in shiitake that are kind of that are prebiotic. We want to maintain as much of that natural form and structure as we can while leveraging its characteristics to get us that kind of texture, that pull apart, stringy effect that you get from these.
Well, that really comes through. So I believe you said to me the other day that about 70% of the product is really shiitake mushrooms. And
Correct.
One thing about this product that is so different than any other plant-based product I've tried is that the texture is really like meat. Now, I know people say that about a Beyond Meat burger, but a hamburger by nature, by definition, is kind of mush. This braised beef is not mush. And you really have, I don't like meat so much that I hate to even use the word tendons, because to me that would be wildly unappetizing. But for those of you who think that that's appetizing, it really has that structural. Look at that. Oh, yours looks, you're a better chef than I am, but mine's kind of similar. I did it just myself, but yeah.
Well, we have a couple of what we call kind of versions of the product. So you're eating the braised beef. What we have here is a pulled pork. So it's very, very, very similar, but we process this slightly differently. We cook it slightly differently, so it's a bit lighter, both in color and flavor and depth of that flavor profile. Look, it's more or less it's the same ingredient profile. It's just a slightly different process, and it's the difference, I guess, between getting like a bit of a lighter, sweeter meat with a pork and a beef being having a bit more depth, a bit more beefiness to it.
I love that you say this because I do a lot of cooking myself. And once you have the base, so for you, you're doing mushrooms. Sometimes I do seitan or tempeh, or sometimes I do mushrooms. I make a great mushroom burger, if I say so myself. But it's all in the seasonings. It really is, the reason people like meat is because of how it's seasoned. Here you talk about barbecue sauce and perhaps having your braised pork made out of mushrooms with barbecue sauce. I mean, so much of meat is the sauces and the rubs. And, so spicing, to Tom's question, is really a key element. I'm wondering what kind of competition you're feeling as young entrepreneurs. And this isn't your first time opening a business, but your first time doing this business. There are others working in mushroom development for plant-based foods. Is there camaraderie among that group? I hear a lot about plant-based bacon made from mushrooms. Are you guys working together, against each other? How do you see the market playing out?
Well, I think that we work on the basis in Australia. It's like there's a lot of camaraderie, so it's not a huge amount of players, and everyone knows each other. And everyone, in all our interactions, seems to have the approach that we're at such a small, tiny base, and right at the beginning of what is going to be such a large curve. We only need to get a small portion of the population, 20% of the population changing 5 out of their 21 meals a week, and we're talking about orders of magnitude much larger than we have now of people eating these kinds of products who really still enjoy the experience of meat, but maybe want to eat less of it. So we look at it as a pretty large market, and I think I was saying to you the other day, there's so much R&D and so much work to be done, even when you say like mushrooms. Fungi as an organism is so complex. So yes, we use an element of the fibers of a fully grown mushroom that's gone through its primordial cycle. It's produced the shiitake mushroom. We take a component of the shiitake mushroom, combine it with other plants, but leverage its characteristics to do that. So, there's all sorts of variants on that in terms of growing whole cuts, mycelial masses in liquid cultures with other plant fibers on other plant scaffolding. Like there's so many variants of it, and there's so many different variants of mushroom and mycelial types that might work better or worse, or so much of that's yet to be tried. So we look around and it has literally mushroomed, and you see on LinkedIn some of these kind of landscape maps of how many companies are operating in the space, and you look at them 12 months ago compared to now, and it's exploded. And as you said, at the start of your broadcast, it's like Beyond and Impossible aren't going to do this off their own backs. If you look at the curve at which even they have scaled and the need to gear up, and there's a lot of manufacturing equipment around the world that's going to need to be repurposed. So we don't see it like that. We're competing in that sense. Yes, we're operating businesses, so we're competing, but there's so many different permutations of how this technology of a mushroom can be turned into products like this. So it's good.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because now you're getting into kind of the more nitty-gritty of running a business. And you guys have chosen, at least at the onset, that might change, to really focus on B2B and getting your braised beef or braised pork and your even full cuts of meat, hopefully at some point soon, to quick serve restaurants and other kind of B2B situations. Why did you decide that rather than retail? And I should add to that, sorry, I know you're in Australia, but people are wondering when you're coming to Europe, and I'm wondering when you're coming to the US. So tell us that too.
I'll start with the first one. So taste and, as Jim was saying before, like taste and texture is so critical. And when we go to the extent of developing the product and all the rest of it, we're going to be heavily biased. So our co-founder and CEO, Michael, had originally approached Marley Spoon, who's a big meal kit company in Australia. I think they operate in the US and Europe as well. And it was quite a deliberate choice to try and enter the market through that channel, because they really touch their customer. They speak to their consumer. And if their customer doesn't like something, they're going to tell them all about it. So they get a lot of direct feedback from customers. So we launched with them with the view that, look, if there were big problems with the product, we would find out through that channel early and fast and in a contained manner. And that worked out super well for us. They told us it was their best ingredient launch ever. We outperformed by several multiples of what we all forecast, and the Corona virus has actually helped that in the sense that there's lots of people ordering meal kits from home. But we are looking into our US and European market entries. I was literally looking at all of those spreadsheets last night before I went to bed. So we're trying to find the right partners to go to both of those markets in, but it will be in 2020 in both of those markets.
So I want to kind of reiterate what you've said there, because I think it's a very helpful tip for a lot of new companies that might be starting. When you go business to business and you maybe go into quick serve or cafeterias or this kind of a situation, you get the opportunity to have a lot of feedback and to make any mistakes without the public really knowing about it. So it's a great way to put your foot in and make any mistakes and do all your learnings before you decide to put the money and time potentially into going retail straight to consumer. And of course, we're all happy to see that you're thinking about the US and Europe, because I really do think that you're onto something here. Another thing that has made your product viable from my standpoint is that for a lot of small plant-based businesses, you do need to repurpose the technology of actually making it on a large scale. So that part of the business equation of getting plant-based items to market hasn't been addressed yet. So it's a huge concern. And then you usually need, because these are small businesses, so they don't have deep pockets, you usually need some kind of middleman contract producer that can make it for you, because you don't have enough money to build your own full-scale, large production house. So you were able to find someone in Malaysia that you trusted enough, that you felt was good enough with the mushrooms. I'm sure there's some care and skill here that needs to, the subtlety of working with vegetables. So how did you find your contract producer in Malaysia?
We didn't. Michael, our CEO, did. But there was some definite rationale to the process. So the first thing, as you mentioned, was Australian fresh mushroom prices are incredibly expensive compared to even North America, but compared to Europe and Asia, they're really expensive. So there's almost no processing of mushrooms that goes on in Australia. And then secondary to that, it's like we wanted to find an intersection of potentially, if we could find what was, a low-grade or agricultural, byproduct, or not necessarily a premium product from a processing perspective, and then also just guided by the characteristics that the product needed. So shiitakes grow slower. In growing slower, it's like a hardwood tree. The cells form, more robustly. They bind tighter, which means the organism itself is a little more robust. The shelf life of a shiitake mushroom can be a couple of months once picked. The shelf life of an oyster mushroom is going to be a week. It'll degrade a lot quicker. So that those actual characteristics of the product in many ways, pointed us to where and how it would need to be made. Shiitake mushrooms are, ubiquitous all throughout Asia and grown in considerable volumes, and not at all in Australia. So we kind of had no choice but to find.
People here don't know how to really use the ingredients, so you can't go to somebody who's already got like a mature business that's using one thing and then having this other stream as a byproduct. It wouldn't exist.
Right. It's one of the tricky things about plant-based business models that maybe consumers don't understand is it's not that easy to just say, okay, everyone go plant-based, because to scale up and get that produced for the world, which is why I do this show, we really do need more than Beyond and Impossible, because you can't just go to someone who already, let's say, does meat and say, well, just switch tomorrow. It requires a lot of shifting. So I see what you're saying. And it's nice that one would think that it's obvious, but sometimes when you're working in a business and you're so tunnel visioned, you can't see the forest for the trees. And it's nice that you're listening to your business model and what it needs and not rushing into these relationships that are critical decisions for your long-term business. Maybe you can walk us through how you decide on your investors, because I think you're picky and choosy there too.
Well, we can be. So, look, we had some of our main investors were known to us before we started this business. We'd already developed relationships with them prior. Michael in his previous business, and one of our investors actually introduced us to Michael, along with 5 other people that had also introduced us. But really, particularly, we look for expertise in either rapidly scaling businesses and getting a global presence, and or in food specifically, in food manufacturing. So we have a cluster of angel investors in Australia that all have really strong food manufacturing backgrounds, that already have companies the likes of which we hope to emulate. And then some of our venture capital investors are more from tech backgrounds, but have scaled businesses globally and quickly, and with a view to doing, we didn't want to start a plant-based meat business to service just little old Australia. We wanted it to be kind of transformational, and to that end, and when you ask about co-manufacturers, it's like we have another co-manufacturer working with in Europe, because there's a different production base of a different kind of mushroom at a different scale and a different cost that's available as an input ingredient. And this particular manufacturer is, has been working with mushrooms for 30 years and has a whole bunch of expertise. That means we could walk in the door and talk to them exactly about what we want and when, and they understood, and they know we couldn't do that with most manufacturing companies around the world. And so to that end, we actually have some of our co-manufacturers and or people in the food industry are investors who we can actually work through these scale-up issues with a lot. So that's been super, super helpful for us. If you can find investors that already have experience in the particular category you're working in, it definitely helps.
Every time we've gone to a co-man, they want to invest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's great that at every decision that you're making to partner with someone, be it an investor or a contract production house, you are really adding value to your product, because you're getting their knowledge, not just their money, or you're getting their knowledge, not just their machinery. So I am very excited to see where you guys go, and I'm excited to try more of your products. I'm wondering, as we kind of wrap up a little bit, you are so close to it and so in it. And also you're in Australia, which is a different perspective than here in the US, or maybe some of my European viewers. What are your predictions for the future? Let's say 3 to 5 years. Where do you think we're going? Obviously we're going plant-based, but maybe if you could delve into some of the details.
So we even within our own business, we have different and nuanced views as to where we see and how all these markets playing out. But there are some key themes that we all agree on, which is that there are aspects of our obviously of our animal production systems that are not sustainable and that are brutal and immoral. And so the more that we can do to kind of offer alternatives to some of those products, the quicker that'll alleviate some of those issues. We think that some of the way that those supply chains are structured and scaled and even potentially subsidized either directly or indirectly, they have the potential to come apart really quickly. But that's a localized thing. I think that the red meat and the protein production market in the United States, the structure is very, very different to Australia. So there'll be different dynamics. I think it'll play out locally in different places around the world. I definitely think big parts of Asia and East Asia and India will revert back to the mean in terms of the levels of meat consumption. And that I think that there'll be some explosive developments over the next 3 to 5 years in some of the areas that we're working in terms of the capability and the understanding of some of these fungal organisms, bacterial organisms, the cellular agricultural type activities. We will start seeing some kind of exponential leaps in understanding and knowledge. We've had this 2, 3, 4 year window where heaps of capital has been thrown at it. That follows with a whole bunch of really smart people paying attention to the problems. That gestates for a while. They build up a base of knowledge, and we'll see a tipping point where that kind of manifests as new products that are really, really good. And then that'll accelerate the decline of some of the alternatives that may taste awesome but have a whole bunch of death and gore built into the chain.
I couldn't agree more. I'm wondering, do you know a company in Chicago called Nature's Find? No. Okay. So I have some introductions to make for you, I think, at the end of this interview. They are working with microbes and doing some really interesting things. I wouldn't call... I don't want to put my words in my mouth. I think they're working with mushrooms, but more so they're working with microbes. It's a slightly different... They call them a type of mushroom, but I think it's a very particular type of mushroom, but very interesting work. And really interesting people. I'll be sure to make that introduction. I'm wondering, so you guys have been in this, technically you just started launching the product in January, although you've obviously been on a path with mushrooms for a while. What do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now?
Oh.
Sorry, is it too early for you?
No. Well, I'll let you know in a sec. There's a bunch of stuff that it's not that I wish I knew now that I knew 10 years ago. It's that perhaps I could have taken some different actions with the same knowledge I had. But
that's exactly what I was going to say. Is I would look a little bit deeper into a lot of those things where I have a little bit of knowledge about a lot of things. But if I knew that this was going to be the pathway, I would learn more about the protein cycles and learn about the minerals that are there and the interactions at the cellular level of, listen to biology teachers in 7th grade, because a lot of that basic stuff is slipped through the cracks and you don't really focus on it. But I am now, so I definitely. Yeah.
I think inevitably we would have been oriented.
Chris, can you get closer to the microphone? Because we're really having trouble hearing you. Yeah.
I think inevitably both of us would have been oriented exactly the same way, orientated exactly the same way. And as of, 10, 15 years ago, we were both already on a path that was mushrooms, soil science, fungi, dirt, food, and in the food system. So it was always going to be a variant on this. I think we're both maybe fortunate and a bit of foresight to have actually settled and zeroed in on this particular area of the market that kind of combines all of our passions and interests, and and with our co-founder as well, it's like all three of us, the intersection of what we care about, what we're passionate about, and what interests us is also now our work. So we're
it's always a joy to work in what you love, and what started out as this hobby passion project, and now it's what you do every day, every night, I know, Jim, you've been at it in basically the garage lab. COVID-19 was maybe a blessing or maybe a curse for you, because they've kind of locked the door and left you.
And just let me go. Just let me do what I do. I'm not interested in what's really going to be fun in 3 years. I'm interested in the next thing that I'm going to make. So,
what is that?
I'm going to make whole cuts.
Okay, give us a time frame.
He said it on promise. No, don't give
tomorrow. Don't hold me back.
Well, we're not letting you out of the garage until you give us one of those. Can I ask you? It will be a whole cut of lamb, beef,
everything. I'm working on all of it.
When we've met different.
So, Chris, I just can't hear you. I don't know why.
After he's mapped the different amino acid profiles, we'll let you know which one it's going to taste like.
Okay, that's wonderful. Okay, well, my last exit question for you both, and thank you again for getting up so early this morning, and thanks for everyone for hanging out with us today. What is your favorite junk food?
Fable with barbecue sauce.
It's not junk food.
No.
Country fried Fable.
Sorry, I meant to qualify. So there's a version of Fable that Jim crumbs and deep fries.
Pull the microphone to your mouth. Really, you got to get right up on it. Thanks.
There's a version of Fable that Jim, being from Texas, did country fried Fable. So he crumbs that and deep fries it, and then I have it with barbecue sauce. It's delicious. It's probably not an everyday food, but it tastes so good.
For me, it was Fable Carnitas. It's the most decadent and rich, fattiest, just cooking it in fat and making it crispy, and So that's it.
So our favorite junk foods are fattened up versions of our own product.
Yeah.
Because I'll say at the base level, your product is pretty gosh darn healthy. It's got lots of protein. I wrote some notes here for myself. It's got lots of protein. It's got lots of fiber, because of course it's based on mushrooms. It does have some fat, but you're trying to emulate meat. So, you got to meet the consumer where it is. So it's a very nutritional product. But of course, if you're going to crumb it up and deep fry it, well, then good luck. I don't know. You're on your own there.
It's good coconut fat too,
It's healthy fat.
I love it. We can rationalize anything here on the Plant-Based Business Hour. Jim Fuller and Chris McLaughlin, I want to thank you for getting up so early, but more than anything else, I want to thank you for setting your sights on making such a delicious and value-added plant-based meat to the market. Really, there's nothing like this that I've tried. So I'm very hopeful to see all the other things you guys have on the docket for pork and whole cuts, and maybe even carnitas one day I'll try. I'm not sure, but I'm loving the braised beef, and I want to show everyone again. So this is what I've been having for lunch here today. Oh my gosh, some noodles. Oh, you see that? Braised beef. This is made out of mushrooms, folks. Shiitake mushrooms. Super yummy. On that, I'm going to take a big bite and I'm going to say goodbye. Chris and Jim, stay with me for a minute. Bye, everybody. I will see everybody back on Tuesday. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.